Hi, it's Richard White here again. It's been a while. Today's fly that I'm going to tie is kind of a variant on a classic, which is what many people would call Montreal Floozie or Montreal Wh. But what I've done is to change the winging material to something with a bit more flash to it. So what I'm using for wing material, instead of red and blue bucktail and white marabou, is to use in different colors Baitfish Emulator Flash. Now it's made to be wound on, but you can cut strands off, and that I find works the best way for smaller bunches. The way I'm using it here is to cut it off and just use it like you would use any winging material. So to get started, as with any fly, I have my hook and the vise. In this case it's a Mustad 79-580 in size 2. You can tie these anywhere from 2s to 8s. In this case I'm going for a larger one. Now I need to start with the material I start with is the one that's going to be the last one I wind onto the body, which is going to be mylar tinsel. And this tinsel is gold on one side, silver on the other. I want silver to show, so I'm going to tie it on with the gold facing me so that when I flip it over I'll get to see the silver. I have here some orange yarn. It's actually a variegated yarn, so I've got a little bit of a different color, but I'm going to bury that in the body so that won't show. But typical body here is orange, a very bright orange also seems to work better. This is an attractor fly. So I'm just going to bind both materials tightly down to the hook shank as I go down. I don't need touching turns here because the yarn fills space pretty nicely. Make sure it's well bound at the rear. Bring my thread forward again. Get that little firmer in the vise. Bring my thread forward. Make sure I leave a little room at the front. Pretty straightforward here. I'm going to wind the yarn on. I'm going to make sure it's not twisted as I wind it on. So I'm going to open up the yarn a little bit, basically twisting it in my fingers to open it up as I wrap it. That'll help me get nice smooth wraps, uniform wraps. Now you could separate the yarn if you wanted the thinner body. I'm using the full, what is this, 4 strands. I could reduce it to 1 or 2 if I wished, if I wanted a much thinner body. But in this case, a little thicker body is useful. So tie that down, clip off any excess, save that because it might be enough for a smaller version of the fly. Now I'm going to wrap the tinsel. I'm going to leave just a little bit of a tag on the rear, and then start wrapping the tinsel as uniformly as I can up the body, trying to create a nice uniform rib as I go. You're not worried about perfect, just it looks nicer if it's close to uniform. Get to the front, hold it tightly while I get a few wraps to secure it. Then fold it back so it's extremely secure. It will not pull out now. Lay a little bit more thread down to give me a base for my wing. Now, the wing material I'm going to be using, the Emulator Flash, is pretty slippery stuff. So what I'm going to do is make sure I keep my thread waxed so that wherever I place that flash, it stays. So we're going to start with a little bit of the flash in royal blue, and I'll just show you what I'm doing. You can see this comes as though you could wind it on like hackle. And I'm just going to take a few strands here, and when you look at it, you'll see it actually has several colors in it. And clip it off, lay that to the side. Then I'm going to lay that on top of the hook shank so it extends just slightly past the bend of the hook. I'm going to pin it with my fingertip so it stays on top of the hook shank. 2 or 3 turns, make sure it stays on top. I don't want this running around to the side. You get the extra wax off. Several turns forward and back, it will stay in place. Clip off the excess. Move to the second color. Traditional second color here is red. So I will repeat the process with a small bunch of red fibers taken off of here. Similar in size to what I have for the blue. And let me do that again because I did not get enough fibers. But I want these 2 layers of red and blue to be as similar as I can make them. So I have some red here, similar to the blue. Take an extra out. I'm going to make this just a tad longer than the blue. Lay it on top, pinch it tightly so that it stays where I want it. A few wraps, wiggle it in place to make sure it sits on top of the hook shank. So it sits on top of the blue. Then I can go back and clip the excess. Now I'm going to add a little more wax to my thread for the last layers, which will be, again, the Baitfish Emulator, but this time in pearl. This is going to really give it a fishy look. Now, this layer should be, I'm using slightly more fibers than I used for the red and blue combined. So I'm going to take a larger section of this, clip that off, now I'm going to just pull on some of the fibers just to give me a little bit more of a taper as it comes out. Roll that in my fingers, and I want this to be only, oops, some of those are a little too long. We'll pull out any extra long ones. Sorry. Lay that on top and be just a little bit longer than the red. Now I'm going to rotate this so that I'm looking straight down on the top of the shank, and I want to lay this pearl directly on the top of the shank. Again, holding it in place with my left hand. I'm going to use a pinch wrap so I'm very certain that this sits purely on top. Now, it will tend to wrap slightly around the other layers, and that's fine. A little veiling there is a good thing. I'm actually going to encourage a little bit of it by moving it with my thumbnail. Because I want that predominant color to be the color, that sort of, that very baitfish look to the pearl. Then I'm going to make sure I clip off excess fibers. Stroke that back, come back to the front and build up a head by wrapping down all those exposed fiber ends, and depending on how you cut it, that's either easier or more difficult. This time I have a little bit more sticking out than I would like. The fish won't care, but I would rather make it look a little bit nicer. I'm going to rotate so I can see where my thread is going. That will help. Whoops, I trapped something there. Rotate the flies again so I'm seeing exactly where the thread is sitting on each side of the fly to give me the best coverage. And bring it back. And now I can whip finish. Bring that up a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, back to front. Drop that in place. Trim the excess. Smooth everything back to make sure I like it. Looks pretty good. I have the pearl slightly masking or veiling the red and the blue, so I have some of each showing on the side. Looks good, excuse me. And time for head cement. Now, if you wanted, you could lay some wire on the underbody to weight this slightly, or fish it on a weighted line. I found that this fly works well when the fish are not taking right at the surface. You get a little deeper down, and it's a that flash is really highly visible, and especially brook trout particularly like those bright flashy flies. Well, I hope that is helpful to people, and if you like it, please leave a comment down below. And thank you for watching.